economics, but she's the incoming director of Latin American Studies at Johns Hopkins at SAIS, right a couple of blocks from here. She'll have her first day on the job on Monday. So we want to congratulate her and wish her all the best, and certainly the dialogue is looking forward to working together with her and her colleagues at SAIS on a lot of issues. And Monica, of course, is a well-known economist and appears frequently in the Brazilian media and also in the U.S. media on issues related to Brazilian economic policy and also Brazilian politics. So we're very fortunate to have her with us this morning to moderate the session. Before I turn it over to her, I just want to thank and acknowledge the director of the Dialogues Energy Program, who is not with us this morning, but Lisa Vicide, who has done really a superb job. And she has a number of publications that are available for you that she's written on Brazil and other Mexico and other important countries and issues related to energy policy. And she's sorry that she can't be with us this morning, but I want to thank her for pulling this event together, and also for her colleague Nate Graham, who has also been coordinating this. And then finally, I want to thank the members of the Energy Committee that have been working closely with Lisa to define an agenda and to organize activities and publications that would be of interest, that would be relevant and timely to a lot of stakeholders and those who are following and involved in this energy sector. So, and a special thanks to Chevron for their sponsorship of this event. And I want to recognize and thank our good friend Alex Valderrama and for her support in this event. So it's all the support of all of you that enables us to carry out this program. So thank you very much for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to the very able hands of my good friend Monica. Monica, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for that very, very kind introduction. It's always a pleasure to be here at the Inter-American Dialogue. And as Michael said, I'm looking forward to having a lot of engaging events on Latin America, which is a region that's not at all quiet these days. And I think we'll have much to talk about. But today we have two very distinguished speakers to speak about the energy sector in Brazil and the prospects for the energy sector and the policies that have been underway in the Temer government and what to expect beyond. So immediately to my left is Décio Odoni, who is the Director General of ANP, the Agência Nacional do Petróleo. And then to his left is José Firmo, who is the President of IBP, Instituto Brasileiro do Petróleo. In the interest of time, these are very distinguished speakers. I'm not going to go into great detail in their biographies. We'll just launch right into the presentations. So we'll go in the order that we're seated, I think. Okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Monica. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I remember I was here maybe a year ago. And I think this is for the first time that we are here. And I remember Camargo, your predecessor, was with me here. And this is the first time that we were here after we got some results from the reforms that we have implemented in Brazil. As you remember, after a few years without offering any new acreage in bidding rounds in Brazil, and as a result of Petrobras' financial crisis and corruption scandal, and the reduction in the oil price in 2014, the oil sector in Brazil suffered a lot. The reduction in activity in the oil sector was much more intense than it was in the economy as a whole. And as a result of that downturn, we decided to implement new incentives for investments to come to Brazil, and I'm glad to show you now some of those results. So I have some slides. I will try to skip them very quickly. So no lawyers in the room, correct? So I can skip them. So we'll talk a little bit about the upstream sector, the natural gas sector, and then a few slides on downstream and refining sectors in Brazil. Well, we have done a lot since 2016. I won't read that, but you know all the reforms that were implemented in Brazil, starting with the authorization for other companies to compete with Petrobras in the pre-salt region. And we had 5 bidding rounds. And as a result of these bidding rounds, we contracted 68 blocks. We managed to get 21 billion reais in signing bonus. And when you look at the map in the called pre-salt polygon, as you know, in 2010 we had a new law in Brazil saying that inside this geographical region, in this polygon, in front of Rio de Janeiro, in São Paulo states, basically, all contracts must be under the production sharing agreements. And this map shows the number of contracts that we have in these regions now and the numbers we had before. So we increased significantly the number of contracts in the pre-salt polygon. And we expect, as a result of all those last 5 bidding rounds, to attract 300 billion reais in new investments, to generate, during the life of those contracts, more than 1.2 trillion reais in tax revenues for governments in Brazil. We expect that 17 new platforms will be built and that the Brazilian production will increase by 2 million barrels a day by 2027. So, but there is still a lot to do. We had I brought this here because we had a normal discussion about local content, and it was one of the issues that was blocking investments in Brazil, and local content regulation was changed for the past bidding rounds. And after several months of very tough discussions with the industry, and Firmo by my side here was one of the key players in these discussions as well, we managed to approve a new regulation for the past contracts in Brazil. And as a result of this new regulation, we got a report from Wood Mackenzie saying that these new regulations that we approved in Brazil recently, they will facilitate the construction of 36 new platforms. They will unlock the development of 21 billion barrels of oil in Brazil. I remember that our reserves currently are 13 billion. And as a result of this, they expect us to increase royalties generation by $28 billion in 10 years' time. And believe me or not, to increase the number of jobs in the Brazilian shipyards by almost 100,000, 95,000 new jobs as a result of this new rules. This is really amazing. But we still have a lot to do. We have in front of us a changing world with all these discussions on the future of the energy mix, decarbonization, emissions, no longer the peak oil, but the peak demand. I won't go too much into this. But in a country like Brazil, we barely scratched our potential for oil and gas. We had a monopoly for more than 60 years. And as a result of that, we drill a very limited number of wells in Brazil. We do not know the potential of several of our producing basins. So it's still time for us to develop our research, but we do not have forever. So we must speed out the exploration and production activities of oil and gas in Brazil. We have, in fact, 3 big different environments in the country. And it's amazing when you compare that. We have the very large and known and successful pre-salt. In 80 wells, we produce half of our production, more than half of our production. Average production in those wells is 17,000 barrels a day. One of those wells, the one in the very famous Libra project, the first project in the pre-salt, is now producing 51,000 barrels a day. 51,000. It's more than all the whole production that we have in the largest onshore producing states in Brazil, with more than 4,000 wells. One well equivalent to more than 4,000 wells. It's really amazing. Then we have all the offshore basins, with 600 wells, 700 wells, producing an average of 1,700 wells. And then we have 7,000 onshore wells, producing an average of 17 barrels a day. So it's a kind of logarithmic scale, 17,000, 1,700, 17. So we must attract the right players for this type of environments. When you look what happened in the oil and gas industry in Brazil, we see a decrease across the board. Number of wells drilled, number of production onshore. The only good results that we had in the past 5 years is the pre-salt. And the pre-salt was responsible for the increase in the Brazilian production. Very limited numbers of wells, as I said, and contracts that were signed 18 years ago, in the year 2000. So we have a series of mature basins in which the recovery factor is very limited. Average recovery in oil reservoirs worldwide is 35%. We have our average of 21 in Brazil, so there is a lot of room for improvement in this regard, attracting companies that can do this work. So our goal is to attract the right players to the right environments. The pre-salt is huge. We need large companies with technology and balance sheet. We need large companies and companies specializing in exploration and mature fields for the onshore, for the offshore. And we need small and mid-sized, hundreds of those in the onshore basins. And you have just a few. What we have done so far allow us to think that our production will be in the range of 5.5 million barrels a day of oil by 2027. I would say that the shale in the U.S. and the pre-salt will be responsible for most of the additional production, non-OPEC production, to be on stream until 2027. We forecast more than 50 new platforms being built and installed in Brazil in this period, but we still have a lot to do in our mature basins, in our frontier basins. We believe that we have potential for almost 2 billion reais of investment in the next 2 years in the upstream sector alone in Brazil. We have the big discussion, and I brought this slide for you, on the transfer of rights. You know that the Congress is now discussing, passing a bill authorizing Petrobras to sell part of the rights in this contract they signed in the year 2010. They acquired the right to produce 5 billion barrels. We believe that we have much more there, and then if this agreement is approved, we may be able to make an auction by the end of this year for these surplus volumes, and we expect that those volumes, the 10 billion barrels in average number, can generate production for 17 new platforms and can generate 1.8 trillion reais of tax revenues during the next 30 years, nominal terms. A little bit about refining. We have in Brazil a market for 2.8 million barrels a day. We have refining capacity in the range of 2.3. We import 500,000 barrels a day. Petrobras has a de facto monopoly in the refining sector. We had some issues with the pricing policy. The government has intervened in the diesel price for the final consumer, adopting a subsidy for the diesel price, and we are discussing through a public hearing process the convenience of having a limited period of time for the price to be changed to the final consumer. I can answer that during the Q&A sections. I will go skip that. If you want to read, feel free. We will leave the presentation here. But what happened in our refining sector is we had a monopoly for 60 years, and we had the interference in Petrobras pricing policy, and we generate an import dependency. This de facto monopoly works now with the import parity. We have the two risks in this regard. If we keep this monopoly, we may face price intervention in the future. We have elections this year. And on the other hand, if we do not see intervention, we now have a player that has a de facto monopoly with a mandate to maximize shareholder value. And that's a problem in terms of competitiveness in the country. So if Petrobras has freedom to operate as a private company, or not, we have problems in both cases. So we need to develop an open, diverse, and competitive market in the refining operations in order to attract investments, in order to guarantee that the prices are market price, and in order to reduce the dependence on imports. A little bit on natural gas. Brazilian market for natural gas is not relevant, does not correspond to the size of the economy. We have a potential to increase the natural gas presence in the matrix. Petrobras is, as a result of their high leverage, they have decided to reposition in the natural gas market as well. They are selling assets. They are opening up a space for new companies to come in, to produce, to sell, to invest. And there is a new gas bill under discussion in the Congress. I don't believe that it will be approved this year. But independent of the gas bill, there are a lot of regulatory measures that we can take and we are taking in order to expedite the opening in the natural gas market. LNG in Brazil is getting more and more important, but we believe that in the long run, there is room for replacement of LNG imports by domestic gas produced, especially in the pre-salt region. So, final remarks. I would like to see that we have potential in the industry to attract more than 2 billion reais investment in the next 10 years. That's why we need a lot of companies investing in Brazil. These are very huge investments, way beyond the potential for a single company like Petrobras. So monopoly is no longer a good thing for Brazil. We need a diversity of players, and we have seen very good results in the upstream sector. We want to see this type of results, competition also in the downstream and natural gas sectors. And my last comment is that we are going through the largest transformation ever in our industry. For the first time, we have an opening in the natural gas sector, in the refining sector. We have large reserves like the reserves that we found in the pre-salt to be operated by different companies, bringing technology and competition to our space. And finally, we are redefining the service sector in Brazil as well, also as a result of the Lava Jato operation, which impacted very, very deeply the conventional service sector in Brazil. So we are now in the middle of a process of rebuilding the industry in Brazil, including the service sector. That's my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Décio. José.
Good morning, everyone. I think this is on. Can you hear me? I don't think I need this. Anyway, so thank you very much. I would like to first thank you for the invitation and for everyone participation here this morning. The challenge of speaking after Décio is becoming kind of a norm for me. I still shamelessly steal information from him almost all the time. So it's always a challenge to find more interesting things after he talks about it. So IBP, for those that don't know, is the Brazilian Petroleum Institute, is an organization for 60 years that has been representing industry in Brazil. It provides advocacy, it provides technical knowledge, it provides training and HR development for the Brazilian industry in Brazil. And I had the pleasure of receiving the invitation to run IBP, to be the president of IBP for the next 3 years. Started 3 months ago. So I'm still a trainee in that matter, but I'm learning as fast as I can. My background has always been in the service sector, so for me this is a great opportunity. I like using this slide. The whole theme is this new window of opportunity. We all have seen what happened in Brazil 20 years ago. We've seen the opening. We've seen a different change as well in the middle of this, which is kind of, we call it the gap, or the gap where we've decided as a country to close down this industry again, and now we're seeing the reopening. So what I like to talk about is a little bit about the difference between that one and this one, and what we see in Brazil as a window of opportunity. This slide shows a little bit the phases of what we've gone through since 1999. The rounds, the green stuff is all the blocks and all the square kilometer that were acquired by the operators, non-Petrobras, other than Petrobras, let's call it this way. So we saw the opening and we saw a tremendous competition in the Brazilian market. By the way, this has then created a wave of exploration in Brazil that came about 8 years later. So for this industry, everything has to be looked against a quite stretched time scale. You cannot look at what's going to happen in Brazil next year based on what's happening this year. You have to be given the typical time for operation in offshore and deep offshore, which normally, I do have a slide that gives you a little bit of a time window of this. So we saw this competition. Then we saw a concentration back in Petrobras. If you look at those 3 years there, where Petrobras pretty much got everything that was available in terms of blocks, and then we saw the blocks disappeared, and we saw no bid rounds for good 8 years, let's call it this way. 5 years is the official number without bid rounds, but we saw a pretty dry period in there. And then we have what we are here today talking about, which is the reopening or the new window. That new window has come with tremendous success for competition, as you can see at the right end of the slide. We were able to reopen Brazil, but also attract a lot of other operators to the market, which is for us the main reason to celebrate success. Not just that we have now bid rounds, but that we have bid rounds that attracted a very large number of players back to Brazil. That's quite of an important thing to note in what happened in Brazil. So I'm not going to go into this. Decio has already looked at it. We do have current demand that is actually the result of what happened 10 years ago. And now we're looking at the demand as a result of what we have done in the last 3 years, and we will hopefully continue to do. But we're talking about a big, big window of opportunity. And it's not small, it's diverse, which is quite good. It's lots of different operators, but it's a very sizable. This is what we've already done. We obviously would like to continue to fill up that bucket and keep that profile of activity increasing in the future, and I'm sure you're going to have a question about it at the end. The reason why we say Brazil is so competitive, and I think what Decio said is we believe that the additional production required will come mostly from shale and from Brazil offshore, is this very good. I think everybody that has been in the oil business has looked at that slide from Wood Mackenzie that says, okay, shale has become very competitive. 15 years ago, if you do any event, you go to any oil and gas event, almost certain you're going to hear the future of energy, the future of oil and gas is coming from deep offshore and ultra deep offshore. That was all the slides. I've seen them all. It was all look at deep offshore because that's where the whole production is going to come. That has changed. We saw some disruptive technology come in the middle of it and prove us wrong once again. So shale is today a reality. It's producing a tremendous amount of oil. It's being able to be kind of a regulator of price. However, we in the deep offshore, and we say we because Brazil is 95% deep and ultra deep, we in the deep offshore are also pushing, we are also coming and looking for efficiency. Obviously, the major player of efficiency in Brazil is what you've just heard, a 50,000 barrels of oil a day well. That is unbeatable in terms of efficiency for the project. But not just that, the entire industry is looking for efficiency, and we are quite happy to see Brazil coming ahead of in terms of competitiveness. So if you look at us, we are way ahead all the other ultra deep and deep players around the globe. Our job, obviously, is to continue to look for improving that because our friends in shale, they don't give up. They keep pushing efficiency day after day after day. So our job in IBP, we're looking at this very carefully, is how can we make sure that this is not just a temporary issue based on pricing, because obviously the entire industry today is operating at very low pricing. So we have a challenge in there. However, today we are the most competitive of all deepwater and ultra deepwater, and that's critical for the success of the future in Brazil. So this is just another slide. This is the slide that I was talking about, the time window. So what we are seeing in Brazil right now is we are pretty much resetting the industry. With the fact that we have stopped it for so long, we are resetting it to almost all the big players that came in, starting exploration pretty much at the same time. So you're going to see a pretty good wave, and that green area there gives you a qualitative, but it's quite a good model that I've seen, information about spend or CapEx spend during these phases. So when we get the T0 of starting exploration, something between 3 to 5 years later, you get the big window of field development. Maybe this is the biggest change between what we saw in the first opening and what we see now. The quality of the exploration acreage given or sold during these blocks that we've seen over the last 3 years is not of any comparison with what we saw in the first opening. So we have today a very high probability of Brazil entering development phase in many, many projects 4 to 5 years from now. And that is where that big money comes in. And that is pretty much where all the opportunities lay, is during that period. Obviously, exploration is important and it generates enough activity. But the truth is, field development is where all the big money goes in, and it's how the industry gets fed in terms of activity. So we have about 3 to 5 years to figure out how to maximize the use of the Brazilian infrastructure, the use of the Brazilian history in oil and gas, and then go for that big development that we're going to see all these big players that came to Brazil. Okay, so we have done it in terms of the upstream, and I think the next slide is better. If you look at the left side of the slide, you're going to see how the upstream is in Brazil today. It's quite diverse. It's not as diverse as we would like, but it's becoming more diverse. So if you look at it, even Petrobras is operating 28% of the market in partnerships. So it is the effect of about 20 years of opening that market. On the right side, you can clearly see a complete different picture. About 80% of all the products needed are coming from a single refining player, which is Petrobras, with 99% of it. And then the imports are putting about 20%, and then Petrobras is about 50% of that. So we see a complete different picture from the left side to the right side. But it is, I think, especially for Brazil, it's an evolution. I mean, talking about open market in Brazil 10, 15 years ago was a lot more difficult than talking about it today. Well, depending on the day. So here's where we are today, very diverse on the left, and then not as diverse on the right side. However, if you look at the transport side, it's starting. It has started. Petrobras has already made some interesting moves there. That's why you don't have a single pipeline there. You have two, because we are starting to get more diverse in that end. However, it's what we want to do and what IBP is working as the think tank, let's call it this way, to build a transition plan for Brazil, is to get to a much more diverse structure where we have multiple players in the production, we have multiple players across the chain, and hopefully even looking at the distribution side and see what needs to be done in terms of Brazil to make sure that we have the best infrastructure in distribution as well that serves the country. And then obviously the consumers will be able to choose how exactly they need to behave in this environment. This is what we're pushing at in terms of very 35,000 feet strategic ideas for Brazil in oil and gas. And I think I finished. Some of the initiatives that you have already seen, A very important one from Petrobras this year, already displaying an intention, a clear intention of selling a large portion and the control of 2 hubs in the midstream and the downstream. And obviously a lot of discussions about gas in Brazil right now and about what to do with the downstream. And that's it. Now, I have to do the sale part of my job, which is we're going to have the largest Congress and the largest exposition in Latin America on the 24th to the 27th of September. And I sure hope that you and your companies will be there helping us and participating on the discussions of this new window of opportunity in Brazil. Thank you.
So thanks to both of you. That was a very interesting general overview of what's happening in the Brazilian energy sector. Of course, I know that many of us sitting in the audience are interested in hearing about what's going to happen to the sector after the elections. Now, the two of you, of course, touched on some really important points, such as regulation, the issue of market openness, and the very politically sensitive issue of Petrobras's pricing policy. So I'd like to hear, in whichever turn you wish to take, your views on what happens after October. Yeah, please.
Well, I can start saying that what we'll probably see after October is what we have seen for the past 20 years in Brazil, is that we are a slow mover as a country. We do not make very radical changes. We have never elected a president with majority in the Congress. We do not have fiscal space in the budget for a lot of radical ideas. And so we respect contracts. Even when we decided to change the contracts for the pre-salt using the production sharing agreement, obliging Petrobras to be the sole operator, we respected the contracts that we had signed until then. And those contracts are now responsible for increasing our oil production. So we expect that those contracts that we have signed already will be respected. That's our tradition. And we expect to have a coalition in government, so we may see some changes in policy for the future. I would say we may slow down the pace of the reforms if we do that on the downside of the situation. But we do not expect any radical change. It may be wishful thinking, but this is our idea.
I like to always refer back to the technical side of the industry when I get this question, because the truth is this industry responds to a much lower pace or much longer time bound than normal industries. And I like making the comparison against the automotive. If you go there and you see Brazil has stimulated that industry by reducing taxation, short-term reduction of taxation, which then gets cars to be sold faster next week, and then 4 weeks the inventory of the factory goes down, and then 2 months later they're hiring and producing again. So we wish oil and gas could be like that. The truth is we respond 5, sometimes 6, sometimes 7 years after the initiatives have been placed. And the same that we're living today, which is kind of the bottom of the market in terms of activity in Brazil, this is consequential of the last decade. What we saw in the last 3 years, and here I would like to give Décio a major responsibility for that. What we have done in the last 3 years, based on what ANP has done and the ministry has done in Brazil, is going to fill up the activity pipeline for the next good 5 to 7 years. Obviously, we would like very much to continue that, to go ahead and make sure we respect the ANP and the ministry plans for the future. And that is obviously dependable on who's going to be elected at the end of the year. However, the activity and the changes, the transformation that has been done over the last 3 years, it's going to continue to keep this industry running pretty much regardless of what's going to happen in October. based on the fact that Brazil has always respected contracts and that whatever happens after that is going to change the direction of the future, but what is done is done and what is contracted is contracted. That's kind of the best way I think we can describe the choices we're making as a country at the end of this year.
Thank you. Let me follow up with a couple of questions before I open up to the floor. So one is on the issue of regulation, which you spoke about, Decio, and specifically the issue of local content requirements, which we know have been, up until the recent changes, sort of a roadblock to investment. Do you see the possibility of there being further reductions in these types of regulations or reductions in local content requirements or not? How do you see that part of the regulatory structure evolving?
Well, the local content regulation for the past year and this year's bidding rounds, they were established, and I would expect that those new rules to be applied in the future. We could see is likely changed, but not deep change in that. But what it was transformational is that we were able to adopt a creative solution for the contracts from 2005 to 2015. It was a major issue in Brazil. It was generating a conflict between the shipyards, the Brazilian industry, the oil industry. And as a result of dialogue that we had, we pacified this issue, and I believe that the question of local content is no longer an issue in Brazil. What we may see in the future is some adjustments in the policy, maybe some type of incentives for exports or for new technologies to be applied there, but we do not see local content as an issue anymore.
Thank you. And finally, just for José, before I open the floor, you have the very important point, which is this is an industry that has a different time horizon from other industries in Brazil, and therefore, when you sort of try to look at the economic cycle in Brazil and in the cycle of this particular industry, or this particular sector, they're not in any way synchronized. So my question to you is, looking ahead and looking at the possibility that Brazil might not be able to do very much on other areas in terms of stimulating growth, do you see this sector as being fundamental in driving growth over the next few years in light of what you've said?
Yeah, the knowledge, let's call it this way, one of our biggest objectives in the short term is to materially change the understanding of the relevance of this sector into the macroeconomic results of Brazil. It's something we've been quiet for too long, in my opinion, as an industry. We're responsible for probably one of the most capable sides of the Brazilian industry to bring growth to Brazil. We have been blessed with the geology. We have the resources. We have an industry that has been developed over the last 60, 70 years. So we have everything we need to be in the important or one of the most important contributors for that growth. But we have not done a very good job of articulating that, of discussing that with the society or with the legislators or with the stakeholders in general. So we're truly hoping to achieve what you've described there as this understanding of what this industry can contribute. We've done that over the last 3 years, a lot better than we have done over the last 20 years. But now it's time to probably be a bit more educational, let's call it this way. So show these results. This industry has, it could have been one of the few that had continuous growth throughout the crisis if we hadn't stopped it for pretty much 5 to 7 years in the bid rounds. We could have the state of Rio de Janeiro being the only state that was not experiencing the crisis if we had maintained and increased production. So there tremendous potential, the numbers we show in terms of FDI, in terms of possible revenue for the government and the country, it's just second to none in Brazil. However, we are not seen like that yet. And I think in IBP we took a pretty good objective this year. This is not a year to do a lot, but it's probably a year to talk a lot. And that's what we're going to do, trying to show that relevance to the Brazilian community, to the stakeholders in general, so that we achieve that understanding. So whatever ideology comes in play next year, we are going to be called in to say, how can we contribute? But it is material, and I think this last 3 years, the oil and gas has been able to show how much we could contribute on the initial of the industry. Now is what we can do over the next 10 years developing these fields. It's going to be very impactful.
Talking about talking too much, let me just jump in and complement. In 2007, when the pre-salt was discovered, we had scheduled the 9th bidding round. In that bidding round, we had 41 blocks inside what we call now the pre-salt polygon. And as a result of those discussions that we saw in that time in Brazil, the government decided to exclude those 41 blocks from the pre-salt bidding round, and we stopped the process. So when I joined the agency, I asked him, Tabitha is here with me and my other advisors, to make an estimate, what would be the result for the Brazilian economy if we had continued with the process. And the result is amazing. We should have had additional 600 billion reais investments between 2008, as Firmo mentioned, the cycle in the industry. 600 billion reais investments until probably 2013, 2014. And then as a result of those investments, we would have had more than 500 billion reais additional revenues from 2014 to 2017. Can we imagine what would have happened with the Brazilian economy if we had that?
The investment rate would have gone up to 25, 26% if that had happened from the current 15.
And we have a deficit of 169 billion reais a year. And then we made an estimate for the future. So if what we're doing now is trying to recover this period and do more. If you are successful in doing what we expect to do as a result of the bidding rounds, and with the excess surplus volume in the transfer of rights region, we estimate that the government revenues for those fields will be in the range of 100 billion reais a year additional. So it's not
small.
It's not small at all.
Well, thank you for that. The floor is open. Please signal if you want to ask a question, and we have mics roving around. Yeah, so we have two over here.
I don't believe you have questions, Craig.
Is this working? So Craig Kelly from ExxonMobil. I'm going to ask a very broad sort of political socioeconomic question. The United States and Brazil have many things in common. A large territory with a great dispersion of political and economic power throughout that territory. In fact, I think we're fairly rare in that both countries have a political capital, a financial capital, and an energy capital in 3 different cities. We also have dispersion of power. We're federalized, a lot of different stakeholders at different levels. Could you say a few words about, given this, the many levers, the many layers of power and stakeholders in Brazil, state governments, different institutions, and so forth, and this big influx of investment that's coming in soon, as Jose mentions, how do you see all of these layers working together, coordinating in coming years as all this investment pours in? Thank you.
Well, I see it kind of similar to what we've seen in Brazil. It's not linear. It's not easier. The best expression I can remember trying to answer that question is Brazil is not for beginners, right? So, however, we do believe in one thing, is that we need to be more visible as an industry in Brasilia, in Rio, in São Paulo, in Espírito Santo, in the Northeast. We need to be more visible. We need to be able to articulate the impact, the social economic impact, the total social economic impact that we generate. Therefore, we can be a good coordinator of these efforts. I think maybe it is a bit a trainee thought in my mind that we can do more if we are able to get the stakeholders to completely, or not completely, or better understand what we do and how we impact. I don't see, and I see sectors in Brazil that are not as relevant as us, that do have this coordination level, that they were able to then not just trust that this coordination is going to happen inside the government, but they become active players of that coordination. It's kind of what the way I see it. It's hard to believe that we're going to become, from day to night, to become a very structured country in terms of coordination. But I think we can do a much better job as an industry. That's what we're hoping to achieve.
Oh, I hope that the results will help. The Brazilian political arena is still impacted by interventionism, populist ideas from the 50s. And we haven't had the chance yet to see the results of a more open, diverse, and competitive market yet in the country. So I believe that when we start seeing the results, and we will see in the next few years, the society will start accepting better all these openings and the needs to end the monopolies and to create markets that are competitive. This is the only way to benefit the society and the consumer.
There was a question there, and then a question in the back. Thank you.
I'm Gabrielle Treba with McClarty Associates. I had a question on the recent, of course, trucker strike that received a lot of media coverage everywhere. How do you see the conversation, the dialogue, moving forward over the next several months on Petrobras's pricing policies? And what can we, you think, expect from ANP or from Petrobras?
Well, it's an important issue. I would like to give a few minutes to it. We barely had free pricing in Brazil. Free pricing was established the 31st of December 2001. And that time, oil was at about $16 a barrel, I remember. And the exchange rate was about 2 reais per US dollar. Then we had free pricing for a few months in 2002. It was an electoral year like this one. Then in 6-7 months' time, oil price was double, $30-something a barrel. The exchange rate went to 4, and then the government intervened. So after that, 2003, we had the Lula and Dilma governments for about 13 years. So I may say that we have never seen free pricing in the industry in Brazil. But we did see it after 2016. And that's very relevant. For the first time in our history, I say, we had the government, the agency, and the company, Petrobras, working as government, as agents, as company. And Petrobras had the authority to define their own pricing policy. And initially they started doing that on a monthly basis. And Petrobras used to say that they were happy with that. Pedro Parente was happy with that, and he said it several times. And with that, the imports start increasing. And the imports start impacting Petrobras' market share. And then at the end of 2017, they said they want to change their pricing policy from a monthly basis into a daily basis to fight imports. And they start fighting imports in the Brazilian ports in which imports were more competitive. So they start defining different pricing policies for different regions of the country to compete. And then we start getting some complaints about the importers. And we were studying those complaints, and we still are. And then the perfect storm, like in 2002, came. We had the oil price increase in April, May, and simultaneously the exchange rate coming up to from 2.33 to 3.8. And Petrobras, that's my guess now, Petrobras was a hostage of their policy because they said that they were going to implement daily changes in the price. I do not know any company that does that. When you have a freedom from in your pricing policy, you just exercise that. You don't need to say, I would want to do that every day. Why not every hour or every minute? Because oil price and exchange rates, they change every second when your market is open. So it's a question of, and they did that for a year on a monthly basis, and they were happy with that. So the society was not happy with that when we had this increase. And then the government decided to step in and to establish a subsidy for the diesel oil. And I would like to, we are not involved in those discussions, but we are called to implement it. And I like to say that this is a solution that's not good, it's not perfect. We didn't want that, we didn't like that, but it is a solution that does not affect Petrobras or other companies' pricing policy, because their right to establish their pricing policy is there, and the Treasury is taking the bill. So the Treasuries, the Brazilian consumers are subsidizing Petrobras and the other companies. And this discussion continued on the other side in the gasoline. And then we decided to step in and to establish a public consultation period to discuss with the society the convenience of having a minimum timing period for the prices that are established by the companies to be transferred into the consumers. We haven't had the result of this consultation yet, but we are not going to interfere in the companies in establishing pricing policies, establishing any type of freezing prices. We have experienced that in Brazil without any type of success during 6 years. We're not going to repeat this mistake. But we are discussing if we can do something in order to organize it better. While it's temporary, while we still have a monopoly, Petrobras, I mentioned here, Firmo mentioned here is a monopoly, and while we do not have changes, radical changes, fundamental change in the tax system. So that's what is under discussion, but there is no intention of intervening in the pricing policy of the companies.
Thank you. So we have about 4 minutes remaining. I'm going to collect 2 or 3 final questions. I know that there's one over here. There was one there too. If you want to ask a question, I don't know if you still do. And there was another one here and one there. So these.
Hi, Kirk Schur with Clearview Strategy Group. The question is short, but the answer is much more complicated, I'm sure. The focus today has been on offshore development and, of course, deep water, particularly with the pre-salt. Lots of environmental issues, questions around spill response, fines, regulations, safety, collective action. Any remarks you can make about the preparations between ANP, IMP, and Brazilian authorities to prepare for that level of activity and assure that environmental concerns will be met?
Let me collect the other 2, and then they'll answer in turn.
Hello, my name is Ricardo Natal. I am taking a master at Johns Hopkins, and I also on a leave of absence at ANP. And I'd like to know your perception about the shale gas in Brazil. We know that if successful, it can bring a lot of revenues and jobs. I'd like to know a little bit about now.
Hi, I'm Andrea Murta from Jota Information Services here in the U.S. So my question might have a very short no answer, so that's great. We probably saw, all of us, the injunction that Minister Justice Lewandowski issued in Brazil yesterday, which forbade transfer of shareholding control of state and subsidiary companies without previous Congress approval. And I was just wondering what you see as a risk of that decision to the plans of divestment that Petrobras has.
Let me tackle, I'm not tackling that one, so.
I will. Just because she's my friend, she made this nice question.
Just on environmental license, because I think it's quite important that we talk about it. It's been in this, we see this industry as kind of a gearbox where every gear needs to be able to turn. And we have been able, over the last 3 years, truly to work this gearbox quite well. But certainly there is lots of future challenges, and I believe environmental license and the evolution of the process in Brazil is certainly one that we need to tackle moving forward, not just for the onshore or the offshore, but for both. And I think the industry, IBP, has been working very hard to bring together the players and achieve that evolution, where the environmental license is, as much as we could be, structured in a way that is predictable, structured in a way that is known, the requirements, and therefore the measurement of the commitments of the companies. It's easier, let's call it this way, in terms of what kind of plan of mitigation of environmental impact these companies have in their projects. So we're not there yet. Let's be honest. We all have looked around and seen the issues that we are having. However, there's not a single person in this industry that I talked to over the last year that is not concerned about how do we act together as an industry, together with the stakeholders, together with Obama, together with all the regulators in Brazil, to come to a next level of predictability, the next level of understanding of the requirements, the next level of evolution of the requirements, so that we can create a better environmental licensing process in the future. I wanted to say it's amazing that there's not a single company that doesn't have a mandate to make sure that every project that we do is sustainable. But it's building the trust between that mandate and the requirements that is going to get us to a much better place than where we are today. So I don't think it's resolved, in my opinion, but I truly see this as a major collaboration effort that is going to happen in the future. But I can't give you the solution for that. It's not easy.
Shale gas and shale oil. Why not? Because of our prejudice. We have 977,000 wells producing in the U.S., correct, David? 670,000. I repeat, 670,000 wells producing in the U.S. currently. They produce using the hydraulic fracturing and the horizontal drilling techniques. We do not have a single well producing in Brazil using those techniques. We have less than 8,000 wells producing in Brazil. And we say that we cannot do that because there are risks involved. Well, if after drilling 670,000 wells, the risks are not mitigated, I would like to see what is the risk. So I believe that we should do it in Brazil. The risks are mitigated. We have a few examples in this regard. The local distribution company of natural gas in Bahia is now trying to buy LNG, importing from Texas, and Texas, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. They are poor states and poor regions, and they need to explore natural gas through hydraulic fracking. But Bahia, Piauí, Maranhão, they don't need that. They have a lot of research to develop. So I think that is a hypocrisy in our society that we discuss this type of thing the way that we discuss. We should be able to discuss on a technical, logical, and clear way and decide if we're going to do that or not. But not because there are hypothetical risks. I give you another example before I finish. The pre-salt and the shale, they start being developed at the same time, around 2006, 2007. Maybe you drill here in the US 14, 15, 20, 30,000 wells a year. We drill 80, of course, a completely different environment. We drill 80 in the pre-salt. Production pre-salt now is 1.5 million barrels a day. And production in the shale is how much? 5 million, 6 million? So, André. Well, it was a surprise. It was a decision by one single judge on the Supreme Court. And we expect that this injunction is going to be voted in the court itself. And I hope that it will be resolved, because it's very important. It is really very important that the divestment program of Petrobras, the privatization of the state-owned companies, not only government, federal government companies, but on the other levels of government as well, they can be privatized, so we can have the government doing what the government must do. And the government must not compete in entrepreneurship with the private entrepreneurs.
Well, thank you very much. Please join me in congratulating our speakers for a very enlightening conversation. So we're adjourned. Thank you.